without understanding this inner dimension that extends in all directions on the inside, we have completely assumed life to be a physical phenomenon. Thoughts have to be in the brain. Brain has to be inside the body. The body has to be in space. But it's exactly the other way around. There is consciousness. There are thoughts. The interaction between consciousness and thoughts gives rise to light. In fact, light is nothing but a shadow of a thought. Exactly like when a three-dimensional body blocks light, a two-dimensional shadow is created. When four-dimensional thoughts block the fourth dimension, consciousness, three-dimensional shadows are cast. And light is a three-dimensional shadow. All bodies in our three-dimensional world, anything visible is visible only because of light. It's just a component of light. When you remove light, the body disappears. So in fact, all we have to explain for the existence of life is light. Where does light come from? What is the source of light? Because if we can find the source of light, we will find the source of life. Because we know life cannot happen without light. Without the sun, what life can we imagine? And this is an established scientific fact. We might find life in many different forms, but there is no way we'll be able to find life in a region where there is no light at all. The first assumption is we have to find a planet around the sun. In fact, we call this the Goldilocks zone, where the earth has to be, or the planet has to be at a certain distance from the sun, to not be too hot, to not be too cold. But we are assuming that the sun has to be there. Why? Because without light, you cannot imagine processes of life. Because if there is a creature that is existing in perfect darkness, what kind of creature would that be? And if there is no creature of light to watch it, what is the meaning of aliveness? What is the meaning of being? Because you move from one place to another because you're looking for something, you're searching for something. Movement of life is initiated by this perception of space, which always happens in light. Even when we find creatures in absolute darkness, the ones who are observing that creature come from a place of light. Two creatures born in darkness, living and dying in darkness, they can never know each other. At least in any sense that we understand what knowing is in terms of form. So light is what gives us the basic property of life. If there is life, then there will be a light source. If you removed all light, then you cannot conceptualize life. You cannot even imagine life there. So what does this mean? This means the very fabric of space-time is woven by light. Light is not just traveling through space. As it is traveling, it is also creating the space-time fabric. And time is just a component of space. Time is not something entirely different. Time is just a way of tracking changes. If there are 10 moments, if all those 10 moments are exactly the same, then you would not call them 10 moments. You would simply call it one moment, no matter how long it is, because there is nothing changing there. It is just one thing. It is because each moment is different. Each slice of life is a complete projection. Totally independent. It's coming from the inner dimension. It is not dependent on, this moment is not dependent on the moment that passed. It is not dependent on the moment that's going to come. It's completely independent. And because each moment is totally unique. Now, why is it unique? Because it's coming from infinity. The number of combinations that are possible for a moment are so many that it's impossible for two moments to be exactly the same. Impossible. Because we're talking about, even if one component changes by the smallest possible degree, you're getting a totally different moment. So there is no way two moments can exactly be the same. Because two moments are not the same, 10 moments are 10 different things. Now we got to make sense of this by joining them. Now we join it through time. We create time. We conceptualize time. We imagine time to simply explain the phenomena of change. Because everything is changing, there are patterns of change. There are repeating cycles of change. All these things creates the perception of time. To track that repetition, to track the movement, to track the changes. Otherwise, time itself is not existential at all. Consciousness exists outside of space, outside of time. Consciousness has no concept of time. It is an eternal now. Everything is happening in the now and now and now. That's it. So why are we still experiencing all the sensations? Why do we still feel gravity when there is no light? Because if light is the fabric of space-time, if gravity is the curving of the space-time because of the presence of a body of mass or energy, then when there is no light, how are we experiencing gravity? Here is the key distinction. When there is no light, you cannot see the effects of gravity. If there is a planet revolving around the sun, let's say you happen to be at a vantage point where you can actually see this, you're able to see that because there is light. When all light is removed, what gravity are you seeing? The effect of gravity as visual is gone. Now, the only component of gravity that you have to explain is why are you experiencing gravity? So just because I turn off the lights doesn't mean I start floating. Still, when I'm walking, I am walking. I am experiencing the sensation of gravity. That is because an actualized state is a component of the excited state. The most important state is the state that is not even visible, that is in consciousness, which is the excited state where everything is connected. Even when you have not actualized a state physically, because you are a part of this excited state of consciousness, all the laws and rules of that world apply. Because you are experiencing yourself as an excited state. In fact, most of the time, you are simply in the fourth dimension as an excited state of consciousness. You are not actually visualizing things at all. Most of the time, you're not seeing things on the outside. This comes across as a great surprise. We totally assume that throughout the day, we are actually watching our bodies and watching what's happening around. This is because we don't pay enough attention to this phenomenon of watching. Just give it a try. Pick one day and say, I want to see what am I actually watching? You will be totally surprised. Most of the time, you are watching thoughts. You're not watching physical things. You're driving, but your mind is somewhere else. You're walking, but your mind is somewhere else. Now, what does this mean when we say your mind is somewhere else? We know this. Daydreaming is a very common phenomenon. We are always somewhere else other than where the body is. Now, how can you be in two places at the same time in a physical world? That is breaking the very laws of physics. How can one object be in two places? And that's exactly what you are. When you're daydreaming, you're in two different places. Your body is in Texas, your mind is in California. Two completely different places. And it is so easy for us to be in two different places that we don't even think about it. We don't even think in terms of, I'm actually in two different places. I call it imagination. I just say, no, physically I'm here. I'm only imagining being there. Well, what's the difference between imagining a body and imagining walking on a beach in California? What is the difference? There's no difference whatsoever. When you're watching the body, you're imagining the body. When you're watching yourself walk on a beach, you're imagining yourself walking on a beach. Both are exactly the same phenomenon. Now, why do you make one thing more real than the other? It's because of the arrangement of life. It's because of what you are more attached to. But if you were to simply look at this process objectively, you are in two different places at the same time. Because your body and mind cannot be two completely different entities. They have to be one. And yet, they are in two different places. That right there should tell us that we are not in a three-dimensional world. Our three-dimensional space-time cannot allow for that. It's like saying that rock is both here and there. It is breaking the physical laws. Now, how is it that we are able to break the physical laws? Are we so special? Is our brain so special that somehow it is able to create additional space which doesn't even exist? That's exactly what we are saying. When we attribute consciousness to brain, we are basically saying brain has the capability to create space and fill it with imagination. And it is all doing sitting inside a dark room where light cannot enter. We're missing something fundamental there. It is because consciousness is a higher dimension. That higher dimension allows for all this. It is a natural property of that higher dimension to accommodate this phenomenon of one thing being in multiple places at the same time. It is a physical feature of that place. In our three-dimensional world, it's breaking the laws. In consciousness, it is the law. In consciousness, it is a rule that no object occupies one particular place at one time, because the whole concept of place and time doesn't exist there. That is why what exists in the fourth dimension are thoughts. Now, what's the difference between a thought and a physical body? A thought is a fourth dimension entity, which means it can be anywhere, in any combination, simultaneously. It can be multiple things. It can have infinite number of versions of itself, and it can do all this instantaneously. That's what a thought is. Thought is simply infinite capability of space to multiply itself seamlessly. That is the difference between a thought and a physical body. A physical body is completely bound to the laws of our three-dimensional world. That is why we can predict its motion, we can predict its activities. We can plot on a chart depending on what force is acting on the body, depending on what force is moving that body, we can precisely calculate. But we can do none of this with a thought. Why? Because a thought is not a physical entity. A thought is not being generated in the brain. In fact, the brain itself is an actualized thought. First, you need to think the brain. The brain has to be there as an imaginary idea, concept. and then you actualize it. How can brain create thoughts? How can brain create consciousness? Because we can so clearly see physicality is a small component of thoughts. When the world of thoughts are actualized in a moment, we get physical reality. That is what we call matter. What is matter? Matter is simply a moment when something matters. In the world of thoughts, of all the different things, consciousness is choosing to focus on one particular thing, and that is what we call matter. Matter is just a form of thought. In one particular moment, it matters. And when you are not watching it, it's back in the world of thoughts. So wherever we go, we are carrying this torchlight of consciousness, and every time we watch something, we actualize it. Which means our three-dimensional world itself is being actualized every moment by the observer, either through an instrument or through the eyes. So when nobody is actualizing our world, where is it? It is just a thought in consciousness. Everything exists as a thought in consciousness. Now, what is consciousness? It is an entity when you remove all limitations of space, when you remove all limitations of time, you will get an extraordinarily different place, different entity whose natural property is to be conscious. Consciousness is not some mysterious phenomenon. Because there is no limitation of space, each point in consciousness is experiencing itself as all the points. That awareness of totality is what we call consciousness. Consciousness is a form of space where the entire space is available on a single point. That is what consciousness is. It is to be simultaneously aware of all the points. That is why you can be in one place and in another place at the same time. Because in consciousness, these two places are not two different places. They are one and the same place. In consciousness, nothing is separated. Space doesn't even exist. Space is a component of imagination. So when we imagine, we spread things out. Our entire visible universe that appears to be so vast, billions of light years across, in consciousness, it is sitting on a single point. It is an infinitesimally small point. Now, here is the problem. How do we understand this? Because for us, the very concept of vast is tied to space. For us, there is no problem in imagining something immensely vast and imagining something immensely small. But we have great difficulty imagining something immensely vast that does not occupy any space. We simply call this point a point of singularity. How do we know it's a point of singularity or a point of totality? Because the mathematic effects of singularity and totality on space-time is exactly the same. Exactly the same. It's a place where our physics and mathematics breaks down. That is what we call a singularity. Now, our mathematics and physics can break down even at a point of totality. Why should it break down at a point that is infinitesimally small? It can also break down at a point that is infinitesimally vast and completely different from space itself. Now, that's what consciousness is. Consciousness is not created. It does not have an origin. It is the fundamental nature of reality. Space is created in it. Thoughts are created in it. Our physical world, which appears to be physical, which is not even physical, is created in it. These are all emergent properties in consciousness. Consciousness itself is absolute. Now, how do you define this absolute when it has no conception of space and time? You cannot define it in terms of a structure. You cannot define it in terms of something that is existing in time. So you cannot define it. You can only define it by removing all the limitations. As the Upanishads say, you can only define it by saying what it is not. It is not space. It is not time. It is not mind. It is not thoughts. It is not body. It is not light. It is not darkness. Remove everything. Finally, you will get consciousness. That is the only way to objectively define consciousness. But this doesn't mean that we have understood what consciousness is. We have mathematically come to the point where we know it exists. But to actually know it, you have to go on a subjective, personal, individual journey. Because consciousness can only be experienced as a totality from inside. From the outside, we can arrive at the door, but only from the inside we can open it.